The Forgotten Promise. The rain fell in sheets against the windows of the Winters estate, a fitting backdrop to Nora's realization that her 15-year marriage had been nothing but an elaborate lie. She stood in the doorway of her home office, clutching a manila folder containing bank statements that confirmed what she had suspected for months. Thomas Winters, her husband and the city's most promising mayoral candidate, was not only unfaithful, but corrupt to his core. Nora's slender fingers trembled as she closed the folder. At 42, she retained the graceful beauty that had once captivated Thomas, her honey-brown hair falling in soft waves to her shoulders, amber eyes that could warm a room when she smiled. But Thomas hadn't truly looked at her in years. Mrs. Winters? Beatrice, their housekeeper, appeared in the hallway. "Mr. Winters called. He'll be working late again. The campaign meeting apparently ran over time." Nora nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Beatrice." Campaign meeting. The words echoed hollowly. She knew exactly where Thomas was, with Vanessa Porter, his 28-year-old campaign manager, whose ambition matched his own. The same woman whose lipstick Nora had found on Thomas's collar 3 months ago. When Beatrice left, Nora sank into her chair, allowing herself a moment of weakness before straightening her spine. She hadn't become one of the most promising architects in Riverview by breaking easily. That was before she'd put her career aside to support Thomas's political aspirations. "It's just temporary," he'd promised. "Once I'm established, you can return to your firm." 7 years had passed since that promise. 7 years of charity functions, perfectly orchestrated dinner parties, and maintaining the facade of the ideal political wife while her designs gathered dust in drawers. The doorbell rang, pulling Nora from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not in this weather. When she opened the door, she found Jonathan Wells on her doorstep, Thomas's oldest friend and law partner. "Jonathan, what are you doing here?" "May I come in?" His usually confident voice was hesitant, his expression grim. In the living room, Jonathan refused a drink, pacing instead by the fireplace. "Nora, I've discovered something disturbing. Thomas has been diverting campaign funds to offshore accounts. He's also taking bribes from Meridian developers to approve their project that will destroy the historic district." Nora felt strangely calm. "I know." Jonathan's eyebrows shot up. "You know?" She gestured toward her office. "I found the evidence. Financial statements, recordings of meetings with Meridian executives, emails." She paused. "And evidence of his affair with Vanessa." Jonathan's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Nora. I confronted him today. He claims it's all legal, just creative financing. He also—" Jonathan hesitated. "He what?" "He's planning to file for divorce after the election. He's worried you've become a liability. His words, not mine. A liability. 15 years reduced to a single, cruel word." "Why are you telling me this?" Nora asked, though she already knew. "Because I remember the Nora Wright who graduated top of her class at Cornell, whose sustainable design for the lakefront project won international acclaim. Thomas doesn't deserve your loyalty, and this city doesn't deserve a corrupt mayor." Nora walked to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "Thomas has powerful friends. He'll bury any accusations. Not if the evidence comes from someone beyond reproach. Not if it comes from you." That night, after Jonathan left, Nora sat alone in the kitchen as thunder rolled overhead. On her laptop, she pulled up old photographs, herself standing proudly beside her designs before she became Mrs. Thomas Winters. Before she silenced her own voice to amplify his, her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Dinner with the Gregorys tomorrow. Wear the blue dress they liked last time. No, please. No, I love you." Just another command from a man who had forgotten. She was ever anything but an extension of himself. Nora closed her laptop and walked through the silent house to their bedroom. From the closet, she pulled out a dusty portfolio case containing her most treasured designs, including one for a women's shelter that Thomas had convinced her to abandon because it wouldn't help his image with his donors. For hours, she pored over the plans, making notes, remembering the passion that once drove her. As dawn broke, Nora made her decision. She would not confront Thomas. She would not cause a scene. She would do what she had always done best, create a perfect, flawless design. But this time, it would be the blueprint for her own justice. Nora packed a single suitcase with essentials. She wrote a brief note for Beatrice, apologizing for leaving without notice and including a generous severance check. Then she took only 3 things: her portfolio, the evidence against Thomas, and a photograph of her parents standing before the modest home they'd built with their own hands in their native Ecuador. "Time to remember who I am," she whispered, to the empty house. By the time Thomas returned home that evening, Nora Winters had vanished completely. Shadows in the deep 3 years passed like the slow erosion of stone beneath persistent waves. Thomas Winters won his mayoral election by a comfortable margin, his wife's unexplained absence transformed by clever public relations into a sympathetic narrative of a woman suffering from severe depression who had gone to seek treatment abroad. Few questioned this story. It was delivered with such convincing concern by the charismatic mayor and his devoted campaign manager, now his chief of staff, Vanessa Porter. Meanwhile, in the small coastal village of Puerto Esperanza, Ecuador, a woman known as Elena Wright had established herself as a respected architect specializing in sustainable community projects. With her hair cut shorter and often covered by colorful scarves, few would recognize her as the former Nora Winters. The locals knew only that she had come to reconnect with her maternal ancestry and had brought with her both skill and determination to improve their lives. "The foundation is secure now," Elena told the group of women gathered at the newly completed community center. "This building belongs to all of you. It will stand against the storms that come." Sofia Mendoza, an elderly woman whose weathered face reflected decades under the equatorial sun, squeezed Elena's hand. "You've given us more than walls and a roof, Hija. You've given us dignity." Elena smiled, though the word dignity cut through her with unexpected sharpness. During those first months after leaving Riverview, dignity had seemed a luxury beyond her reach. She had lived in a perpetual state of both fear and shame. Fear that Thomas would find her, shame that she had allowed herself to be so thoroughly erased. Later that evening, as ocean breezes swept through the open windows of her modest home, perched on the hillside, Elena carefully reviewed the documents spread across her table. Bank statements, property transfers, email exchanges, all meticulously organized evidence of Thomas's corruption. For 3 years, she had quietly built her case, working through trusted contacts to track the mayor's growing web of illicit dealings. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call. The screen displayed the name Daniel Rivera. "You've received my package?" she asked without preamble. "Yes." Daniel's voice came through clearly, despite the distance between them. "The documentation about Meridian's environmental violations is damning. Combined with the financial trail showing the kickbacks to Mayor Winters, it's exactly what I needed to complete the investigation." Daniel Rivera had entered her life 8 months ago. An investigative journalist whose dogged pursuit of corporate, environmental crimes had led him to Meridian developers and consequently to Thomas. Elena had approached him cautiously, offering information without revealing her true identity. Over time, a careful alliance had formed. "Have you decided?" Daniel asked, his tone softening. "It's been 3 years, Elena. The story is ready. But I won't publish without your consent." Elena gazed out at the darkening horizon where the ocean met the night sky. "Thomas is hosting the Riverview Charity Gala in 2 weeks. It's his showcase event of the year. A fitting stage, Daniel noted. But are you prepared for what it means? Once this breaks, your identity— I know what it means, she interrupted gently. I've had 3 years to prepare. She paused, tracing, her finger along a photograph of Thomas cutting a ribbon at the controversial Meridian Towers development. 3 years of silence is enough. After ending the call, Elena walked to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. From it, she withdrew a red dress she had designed herself and sewn with the help of local artisans. The fabric incorporated traditional patterns from her mother's homeland, transformed into a contemporary silhouette. It was simultaneously a connection to her roots and a declaration of her evolution. The next morning, Elena met with Federico Suarez, the village elder who had become like a father to her. "You're leaving us," he said, not a question but an observation as they walked along the beach. "Not forever," Elena replied. "Just long enough to finish what I started." Federico nodded thoughtfully. "When you arrived here, your eyes were like empty houses, beautiful structures with no one living inside. Now I see the light has returned." He stopped, facing her directly. "But revenge is a dangerous fire, Hija. It can consume the one who carries it." "It's not revenge I seek, Federico." Elena's voice grew firm. "It's justice, not just for me, but for the historic neighborhood Thomas destroyed, for the people displaced by Meridian's developments, for the environmental damage they've caused. And after justice? What then?" The question caught her off guard. For 3 years after had been an abstract concept, a hazy future beyond the single focus of her plan. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want the right to find out. I want to reclaim my name, my full name, Nora Elena Wright Winters. I want to exist again." 2 days later, Elena stood at the small airport, a single suitcase beside her and her precious portfolio of designs under her arm. Sophia, Federico, and a dozen other villagers had come to see her off. "Remember," Federico said, as he embraced her, "the strongest structures bend with the wind rather than fighting against it." On the flight back to the United States, Elena opened her portfolio and added new sketches, designs for a cultural center in Puerto Esperanza that would celebrate the community's heritage while creating economic opportunities. It would be built, she decided, regardless of what happened in Riverview. It would be her promise to herself. In a hotel room in Boston, she met with Daniel Rivera in person for the first time. He was younger than she had imagined from their phone conversations, with intelligent eyes that assessed her carefully. "Are you certain about this approach?" he asked after reviewing her plan. "There are safer ways to release the information." Elena shook her head. "Thomas built his power on public perception. His downfall must come the same way." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "You know, when we first connected, I thought you were motivated by the bitterness of a scorned wife. Now I see it's something else entirely." "What do you see?" "An architect, in every sense of the word. You're not just exposing corruption, you're redesigning justice." The evening before her return to Riverview, Elena stood before the mirror in her hotel room. She had dyed her hair back to its original color and styled it as she once did. The woman who gazed back at her was neither fully Nora nor entirely Elena, but someone new. Someone forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by the quiet strength she had discovered in her years of exile. She touched the red dress hanging nearby, running her fingers along the intricate patterns that told the story of her journey. Tomorrow, at the Riverview Charity Gala, Mayor Thomas Winters would come face to face with the woman he had dismissed as a liability, and the evidence she had carried back from the shadows. The reckoning dawned. The Riverview Grand Hotel gleamed like a jewel against the night sky, its ornate facade illuminated by strategically placed spotlights. Limousines lined the circular drive, depositing the city's elite onto a red carpet that led to the ballroom where Mayor Thomas Winters was hosting his 4th annual charity gala, an event that had become the crown jewel of Riverview's social calendar. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers, Thomas moved through the crowd with practiced ease. At 47, he had mastered the art of appearing simultaneously approachable and authoritative. His silver-streaked hair and tailored tuxedo projected success, while the campaign-ready smile never faltered. Beside him, Vanessa Porter wore a sleek black gown that complemented her role as the power behind the throne. "Mayor Winters," called Philip Harrington, CEO of Meridian Developers. "Magnificent event as always." Thomas clasped the developer's hand firmly. "Philip, your generous contribution made it possible. The Children's Hospital expansion will bear your company's name, as promised." "Speaking of promises," Philip lowered his voice, "have we resolved that zoning issue for the Riverside project?" "Consider it handled," Thomas assured him with a wink. "The council votes next week." As the evening progressed, Thomas took to the stage, commanding attention with the magnetism that had carried him into office. "Ladies and gentlemen, your incredible generosity tonight has raised over $2 million for Riverview Children's Hospital." Applause erupted around the ballroom. Thomas raised his hands modestly. "But before we continue celebrating, I'd like to introduce someone special. Many of you have asked about her over the years." A curious murmur rippled through the crowd. Thomas's voice softened to what journalists had dubbed his sincere register. "My journey hasn't been without personal challenges. Tonight, however, I'm overjoyed to announce that after 3 difficult years, my beloved wife has finally returned home." The ballroom doors opened dramatically, and all eyes turned expectantly. Into this theatrical moment stepped a woman in a striking red dress that seemed to capture both fire and blood in its hue. The intricate patterns woven into the fabric caught the light as she moved with unhurried confidence toward the stage. A collective gasp swept through the room. Those who knew Nora Winters recognized her immediately, yet something profound had changed. The woman ascending the steps to the stage carried herself with an authority that commanded respect rather than requested it. Thomas's practiced smile faltered momentarily before recovering. He had been informed of her return yesterday, a carefully orchestrated surprise arranged by his PR team to generate sympathy and admiration. What he hadn't expected was this transformation, this quiet power that radiated from the woman now standing beside him. "Nora," he said, embracing her for the benefit of the photographers. "Welcome home." When she took the microphone, her voice filled the room with unexpected strength. "Thank you all for your warm welcome. It's been a journey of rediscovery." She smiled, making eye contact with specific guests. "I've learned so much during my time away, about architecture, about community, about integrity." Thomas's hand tightened imperceptibly on her waist, a warning. "My husband has accomplished much in my absence," Nora continued smoothly. "The face of Riverview has certainly changed." From the side entrance, Daniel Rivera slipped into the ballroom, nodding almost imperceptibly to Nora. Beside him stood Jonathan Wells, whose presence caused Thomas to stiffen slightly. "In fact," Nora said, "I've brought something special to mark my return. A new architectural design I've created specifically for Riverview." She gestured toward the large screens surrounding the ballroom, which had been displaying tasteful photographs of previous charity projects. The images shifted to detailed architectural renderings of an elegant community center. "I call it the Truth and Reconciliation Center," Nora explained as the guests murmured appreciatively at the beautiful design. "A place where those who have been displaced by recent development can find resources, legal aid, and community." Thomas leaned toward her, his smile fixed, but his eyes cold. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Nora continued as if he hadn't spoken. "It will be built on the site of the historic Westbrook neighborhood, a community of over 200 families who were forced out when certain development projects were fast-tracked through suspicious zoning changes." The screens changed again, now showing before and after images of the demolished historic district alongside the luxury condominiums that had replaced it. "Nora," Thomas said more loudly, reaching for the microphone, "I think we've taken enough of everyone's time with—" "I'm not finished, Thomas." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the silk. "The Truth and Reconciliation Center will also house the Riverview Transparency Project, a journalistic initiative documenting the relationship between Meridian developers and city officials." The screens now displayed headlines, bank statements, and emails, all carefully selected evidence from Nora's 3 years of investigation. Philip Harrington stood frozen, champagne glass halfway to his lips. Vanessa Porter had gone pale, her eyes darting between the screens and the exits. "My wife is clearly still unwell," Thomas announced, finally wresting the microphone away. "This is unfortunate timing for a relapse of her condition." "I'm perfectly well, Thomas," Nora replied, her voice carrying even without amplification. "In fact, I've never been clearer about who I am and what I stand for." Daniel Rivera stepped forward, press credentials visible. "Mayor Winters, would you care to comment on the documents showing your offshore accounts receiving payments that coincide exactly with Meridian's project approvals?" The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters who had been covering the charity event suddenly transformed into investigative journalists, wealthy donors retreating from Thomas as if he carried contagion, Philip Harrington making a hasty exit through a service door. In the midst of the storm, Jonathan Wells appeared at Nora's side. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected. "Every person who provided evidence, every whistleblower who risked their career, this victory belongs to all of us." Thomas pushed through the crowd toward her, his face contorted with fury. "You think this changes anything? I still have friends in this town, powerful friends. This will never stick." "It already has," Daniel interrupted, holding up his phone. "The full investigation is live on 5 major news sites. The FBI has been provided with all evidence simultaneously." As security personnel discreetly approached Thomas, Nora faced her husband one last time. "You called me a liability," she said softly. "But I was never your liability, Thomas. You were your own." In the days that followed, Riverview underwent a seismic shift. Thomas Winters resigned in disgrace. Multiple indictments were filed, and Meridian Developers' stock plummeted amid investigations into environmental and zoning violations. 1 month later, Nora stood on the vacant lot where Westbrook neighborhood had once thrived. Construction equipment was arriving, not for more luxury condominiums, but for the Truth and Reconciliation Center. Funding had poured in from unexpected sources. Former residents, community organizations, and even guilty consciences seeking redemption. "Will you stay?" Daniel asked, joining her at the site. Their professional collaboration had gradually evolved into something deeper, a connection founded on shared values and mutual respect. Nora smiled, watching the sunrise illuminate the empty space with possibilities. "Not permanently. Puerto Esperanza needs me too. I'm thinking of dividing my time, 6 months here, 6 months there, a woman of 2 worlds." "No," she corrected gently. "Just one world where I can finally be my complete self. Nora Elena Wright." She paused thoughtfully. "I'm dropping the Winters." As workers began marking the foundation lines of what would become her most meaningful design, Nora felt a sense of completion. The silence of those painful years had transformed into something powerful. Not a scream of revenge, but a clear voice of purpose that would echo through the lives she touched, in both of her communities. "You know," Daniel said as they walked the perimeter of the construction site. "There's a saying in journalism, the most important stories are those that break the silence." Nora nodded, thinking of Sophia, Federico, and the villagers who had helped her rediscover her voice. "And the most important buildings," she replied, "are those that create space for new beginnings." In the distance, the city skyline reflected the morning light, a landscape forever changed, not just by exposed corruption, but by the courage of a woman who had walked through darkness and returned bearing the dawn.